Diamond King. It's the Diamond King Podcast. It's the Diamond King Podcast.
Joining me on the podcast today, former police chief Gerald Sticker, and in my opinion, a Diamond King himself. Gerald, thank you so much for coming. I really do appreciate you taking the time to come and visit with me to talk about your service here in Mandeville as police chief, your service to the country as a combat veteran in the Marine Corps, and your upcoming service as a candidate for sheriff of Tangipola Parish. Thank you for coming. I'm looking forward to hearing about this from you.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today, Aaron. And, we worked together on a lot of different projects over the years, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. So, again, thanks for having me.
Right on, man. You and I met a few years ago here in the jewelry shop, and the first time we got to spend any kind of time together to get to know each other was the Hope House fundraiser. Is that their biggest event that they have?
That is, that's their probably hallmark event every year.
What's the name of it?
It's the Men Who Cook.
Men Who Cook, that's right.
And so that's coming up again, I think, actually this year. But,
right on.
Yeah, over the years, I work with the Children's Advocacy Center, the CAC, and Hope House, and so that's basically their big fundraiser. And so our children in our community are our most precious commodity. That is our future. If we don't invest in them, we don't do what we can to help them out, then it's not going to end good ultimately for us as a society.
Oh yeah, we're going to get to more of that later because I have a lot of thoughts on that. And
Sure.
I suspect you have rather keen insight. But we went together to what was it, the Lake House? Yeah, went to the Lake House, and they had a dinner. And so this is a humbling experience, having to go, because this was more legwork than I had anticipated. But lucky, I don't mind interacting with people. I find it interesting, and you never know what's going to happen. And so you and I basically had to walk up to people while they were eating their dinner. So we're standing around the restaurant scoping people going, they look like they're about to get finished, or look, I think they just ordered. Let's go hit them while they're kind of waiting for the food. And we had to go up to this table and cold solicit money. And so a lot, and some of these people knew you. Some of these people knew me. Most of them knew neither one of us.
That's correct.
Or didn't at least recognize either one of us. And so we would have to walk up and say, excuse me, pardon the interruption. I'm Aaron DeBoss, owner of DeBoss Jewelry here in Mandeville. This is Police Chief Gerald Sticker. And you would say, how you doing? And we had to work through this dynamic, and sometimes you were taking lead on it. Sometimes I was taking lead on it. But we really had to try to work together to try to get the donations. And we did really good. We had a lot of people that donated, but in the downtime in between, you and I got to sit around and hang out and visit a little bit. And that's when I really felt that I had the opportunity to get to know you and talk to you a little bit. And frankly, that's when I decided I liked you. I mean, you don't know somebody until you spend a little bit of time with them.
Absolutely. When did
your career start here in Mandeville?
My career started in 92. I think about mid-92. I came on as a reserve police officer and volunteered my time. And in June of 95, I was actually offered a full-time position. So June 30th of 1995, I came on to the Mandeville Police Department as a patrol officer. And just, over that 26-year full-time career, worked my way up through the ranks. Worked patrol investigations, ended up running both of those divisions of the department, and ultimately was the operations commander. And then, eventually the last 4 years of my career, I was appointed chief of police. So in Mandeville, it's an appointed position, not an elected position. So it's appointed by the mayor, and it's ratified by the city council. And so, and I had a good 5 years. 4 years, 11 months as chief, exactly. But I've had people ask me, what was your favorite day on the job? And I'll tell them my first one. I wasn't getting paid. I was a volunteer. I was a reserve policeman. I got an opportunity to fulfill a calling, a dream. And so, we weren't making squat in the beginning, and, the pay came up. But at whatever level you're at, you're never going to get wealthy, as a police officer. But it wasn't about that. It was a calling. and it was about helping people and making the community safe. And I mean, I just enjoyed the first day that I got to put on that uniform was the most rewarding.
Well, in getting to know you, also I learned that you are a Marine Corps combat veteran.
Yes, sir.
So this was another uniform, but your history of service and dedication to the community and to the country goes back a bit farther than 1995, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah, I graduated Ponchatoula High in '86, and I have a December birthday, so I was 17 actually, and so I had to. My mom and dad had to sign the enlistment papers to actually get me in. So I was that summer after I graduated Ponchatoula, went straight off to the Marine Corps, and I didn't turn 18 until after boot camp, and I was on my first in my MOS school at Camp Pendleton in California.
How old were you when the spark went off in your mind? You discovered what the Marine Corps was, and you said, "I'm going for that."
From the time I was about 9 or 10 years old. I had made two decisions, even as a 9 or 10-year-old. I wanted to be a police officer, and I was going to the Marine Corps. And probably, as a kid back then in the late 70s, late 70s, One Adam 12 and all the police shows and SWAT, that had me hooked. And then, I saw the commercials of, the Marine Corps and the Marines of dress blues, and it just looked like it was just the advertising. They got me hooked, as marketers. And so it was, from the time I was 17, I took that oath to uphold the Constitution as a Marine. And I got out right after the first Gulf War. It was 1991. And then, took that second oath at City of Mandeville as a reserve officer, and again in 95 full time. And so, I've served my whole, adult life. It's just what I'm called to do. I don't know anything else.
Well, I think you have to be made of the stuff. A lot of people, I can tell you personally, I've always been a fan of the military. I've always admired, the efforts of fighting men and women. I've always, really enjoyed the history of the American military. And,
sure.
As a young person, I had a brief moment in my mind, because I was raised on a farm, and I thought the military could be a way off the farm for me,
Sure.
And turns out that wasn't my path. But my admiration, my appreciation for it still exists. Honestly, at this point in my life, it's bigger and stronger in me as a citizen than it ever has been
Sure.
before, because I now have perspective as an adult that I didn't have as a young person. And when you look back at what the real service, what it looks like,
Right.
what real deployment looks like, and the pressure of that on you and on your family and on your whole world. Now that I'm a parent and I have a young son and a young daughter,
Sure.
the weight of that just keeps. The more I think about it, the more value that has to me as a citizen.
Oh, absolutely. The families too. The spouses that are left behind, and they assume both roles. And when their spouse is deployed. And even in law enforcement, the shift work, I couldn't tell you how many were coming up on Halloween. Every Halloween night, I think I took my two boys trick-or-treating. I think maybe 1 year I had off. But other than that, their whole time coming up, I was working. Spent many a Christmas Eve, in a patrol car, many a New Year's Day, Thanksgiving. But, I mean, that's just, it goes with the territories. And so it's a sacrifice that not only that service person makes, or that law enforcement officer make, or any of our first responders for that matter, but it's those families, because they're there and they're missing part of their family. And so it's a sacrifice on several levels. Notwithstanding the raising by my parents, I owe everything I have to entering the Marine Corps, and that discipline, that sense of service. And it was a natural transition into law enforcement because of it being a service-oriented profession, if you will. And, it's City of Mandeville at the time I was chief, 37% of my department were veterans, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, et cetera. And so, it's just a transition. It's law enforcement organizations by structure and by design, to an extent, are paramilitary,
Sure.
in their structure. And so, it's just a natural fit, and it's serving and protecting the community. And so, again, it's that oath of office to protect and uphold the Constitution. That's what it comes down to. It's like, I've been doing that in the military, so I'm doing the same thing. I'm just protecting my jurisdiction, my beat, if you will.
That's right. Enforcing the damn law.
Exactly. Yeah, it ain't rocket science. So.
Well, I mean, organization is a funny thing. People talk about it. It's hard to implement.
It's hard. It's dynamic. Leadership is. I used to say all the time, leadership would be great if it wasn't for people, because you lead people and you manage things, right? Assets, and stuff, and so. And with those people come people problems, and the leader included, because he has personal stuff that he's bringing to the job, and everybody does, and so just to keep everybody focused and doing the right things for the right reason, and try to dispel all the cliques and the gossip and the rumor mills and all that in any organization. Not just, it was in the Marine Corps, it was in law enforcement. And
that's good business.
Yeah, and being Southern Baptist in the Baptist church, it's just people, and so it just takes a leader with what I call a 30,000-foot view to kind of stay above that, to see things for what it is. And when people they would come to me with issues, I was like, well, okay, that's fine, but what does that have to do with what we're paying you to do? For law enforcement, an officer would come in and I was like, okay, well, that's fine. That is an issue we need to address, but you haven't written a ticket in 6 months. Why aren't you doing your job?
Sure.
And so they're focused on everything else except themselves. And so it's constantly, you don't, you're not really dismissive of them. You address it, but it's a constant refocusing of people on the mission, and keeping all those moving parts moving in the same direction. With the supervisors, you got several, the frontline supervisors and the middle administration, and up to the chiefs, and then, the mayors, or, the elected officials on top of all that. It's like herding cats. Yeah. So,
well, you're fighting against human nature.
Exactly.
You're trying to get people to carry out very specific tasks, because it's critical. You and I discussed this one time. The law enforcement is literally the starting point, the tip of the spear of our legal system. Without the officers, there's nothing for the court system to work with, and that's
right.
A lot of people, and that's a lot of facts and a lot of details, and it is a slippery slope, a difficult gauntlet
Sure.
of potential failures.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine what it's like trying to make sure that because everybody down the line is relying on you, or they're relying on how that officer did their job, because if that's not right, then you're starting off
Right.
wrong. And
there's a lot that gets dumped on law enforcement. Everybody makes these great plans of implementation, whether it's mental illness, or whether it's child abuse, domestic violence, and we're going to pass all these laws, and it all comes down that funnel to law enforcement.
they got to do it.
Yeah, because we in any 12-hour shift, we're dealing multiple times with all of those situations, and putting the right people in the right conduit, even though there's an enforcement element there, and that's what we're there to do, is enforce the law. But there's a lot of times people that are committing crimes, there's mental illness involved, and there's substance abuse involved. And so, me personally, even before I was chief of police, as operations captain, and even as a patrol officer, I saw the importance of working with all of our organizations, the churches, CASA, Safe Harbor, all these organizations, the district attorney's office, even when, we'd have meetings, all the law enforcement agencies. And so communication is key. And so, kind of my focus in law enforcement is that the more that we can support those organizations that are working with foster children, that are working with domestic, violence victims, the more we can help them, and the churches especially, the more we can help them be more effective, the less we got to do our job of arresting people.
Sure.
And so ultimately, I was trying to work myself out of a job. And so that's why I didn't mind trying to raise money for different organizations to help their cause, because the more effective they are, the more we can, focus on, other things. And I realized it's pie in the sky, but yeah, I was trying to work myself out of a job.
You have to have an ideal to work toward.
Sure.
You can't fix the problems of humanity, but you can certainly rub it in the right direction a few times, in your life. You can serve people, and the reality is there's no magic dust. There's no reset button. None of these fantasy things exist. The truth is, you have to go out there and you have to fight against it. And fighting doesn't always mean violence. Fighting means going out there and pushing and trying. Being involved in law enforcement seems like, from what I can tell, it's a hard job. It's a really hard job, made harder for some reason. I don't know why it always seems like they always got money for other stuff and not for the police department, not for the law enforcement. You guys should be so well funded. Everybody should be driving brand new everything. People should be fighting, to get in. It should be the best damn job. It should be better. You know what I mean? They should be fighting to get in, like they do the riverboat pilots in New Orleans. You know what I mean?
Right.
They should be clawing to get to have the opportunity to be blessed to be in that organization. And for some reason in our society, it's not set up that way. It's set up to where it's a difficult job made harder by difficult circumstances. Is my read on that correct?
To an extent, and I think every community is different. And look, money drives everything. The size of business that you run is based on how much you're bringing in and how much you're putting out. And so different communities that have different tax bases, different economies, all of that is directly affects the quality of a law enforcement agency that you have, because it costs money to train and equip a brand new police officer, and that brand new car that they're riding in within 5 years, because it's 12-hour shifts. They're riding on city streets. It's not interstate driving necessarily. Some are, but it's cop miles, as I call them. They drive them hard, and
you're wearing that damn vest and all that gear. You got to have the AC cranked.
Yeah, and so it's just it's very expensive. It is, and so
but what I'm saying is it's challenging.
It is.
It really is challenging, because I feel, look, I get taxed as a businessman. I take a beating.
Sure.
I mean, I take a beating, and everybody does. Anybody,
Right.
God help if you make any money. It's hard to meet the requirements. I've had to really struggle at times in my career to make sure that I'm meeting my tax burden. And then I have police officers that come into my shop and guys that I've come across in all departments, not just Mandeville, all departments. And I've heard a lot of them say that, some of these guys, they cut grass on the weekends. Sure. They have second jobs, and it blows my mind. Mm-hmm. I'm like, you pulling 12-hour shifts, risking your life every day of your life, dealing with the absolute highs and lows, mostly lows of human experience.
Sure.
You see people on the worst day of their life every day. You're going to catch some poor son of a bitch who's having the worst day of his
Sure.
life. And for that, you have to carry a second job.
Mm-hmm.
That's not right.
No, and it's dangerous too. Like I say, because they're working and nonstop. On top of that second job, they have their regular. Most of the time, it's 12-hour shift. And then there's court appearances. There's other private details they're working, and so literally they're working some of these guys and gals 7 days a week. They don't get a break. Hence the and that long term. Affects their lifespan. The average age of a law enforcement officer after retirement is a few years, just because it's stressful. PTSD is prevalent, suicide, divorce rate. I mean, everything just it piles up, and there's no dollar amount. Just like in the military and law enforcement, when someone signs up to protect their community or their country, they sign a blank check and they hand it over. And hoping that one day it's not cashed in, but sometimes it is, and so there's a dollar amount.
You mean that blank check you sign over is your life?
Your life, absolutely. Yeah. And so it's a tough job, but that's why I call it a calling, because in some people you couldn't pay them enough to do the job that first responders do.
Sure.
And so. For me, it was a calling. I've had bad days, don't get me wrong, but I've literally, never woken up and said, man, I got to go to work today. I get to go to work. There's a difference between get to go to work and got to go to work. Mm-hmm. And so I would get to go to work. It's all about, the product you're putting out, professional service, right? You get the calls on time. You give them a professional response, and you follow up after the sale or after the call, mm-hmm. right? And you call that person, hey, I took the report on your stolen cell phone, for example. Is it still stolen? Have you had any more problems? This is what we've done. And, the citizens are like, man, they call me back, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard, even as of late, man, they came out, it took them 45 minutes to get to a call, or and I'm not talking about any particular agency, but when they got there, they act like they didn't even want to take a report, and I never heard from them again. And the other part of that is the elected officials, the council, that funds the law enforcement agencies. Every week when I was chief, I was talking to my city councilman, I was talking to my mayor. Hey, council person, you in your district, you had 5 vehicle burglaries, and they were in this neighborhood. And so that way, when he talked to his constituents, is like, he knew they had vehicle burglaries. It made him look like he knew what was going on, right? And so every week I would communicate with all 5 of those council people. And so at the end of the year, when it came time for Gerald as chief to go to that city council and ask for 5 new police cars, or we need an aircraft carrier and Lake Pontchartrain, mm-hmm. They would like, damn right you do. We've been because every week, a lot of law enforcement administrators, they don't have those conversations with their elected officials, and so when they come up at the end of the year and they're asking for hundreds of thousands of dollars from that council, the council's like,
for what?
For what?
Yeah.
And because you haven't did your job, in keeping them abreast of the pressing community-sensitive issues that are going on in their districts. And so it was always an easy sell for me, and it all comes down to communication and relationships.
Well, that reminds me of what I was going to say earlier. It seems, because I was saying I don't watch a lot of TV anymore, but when I do, I've noticed that you have sheriffs in regions here and there who have just called bullshit
right
on crime and said, you know what? I am not going to be told that the sky is green anymore. I am not going to pretend. I am not going to pretend like up is down and in is out anymore. Mm-hmm. And they just are like, this is the law. This is right and wrong. And there's a guy down in Florida. Every time something he's developed, he's a sheriff. I can't remember his name, but he's developed a fantastic, just a beautiful, and it's laughable, because he says, well, here's what happened. This guy was in his car doing this, And then when the officers rolled up, this is what happened. And he got shot, and now he's dead.
Yeah. And shot him a lot.
And they shot him till he was dead. And let me just say, this should be a lesson to anyone who wants to try to do that. It's going to end. And he's not mocking anybody. He's saying, damn it.
Right.
Reality, folks. You know, Joe Arpaio from Arizona, famous Sheriff Joe. He's famous for making jail unpleasant.
Right.
You know, making them work and live in tents. You know, when you were in the Marine Corps, in the damn desert, you ever sleep in a tent?
8 months.
Yeah, it's good enough for you.
Man, most of the time it wasn't even tents. It was just in the dirt. You know, we were moving so fast. So,
yeah.
You know, tents weren't around most of the time.
Yeah.
So, to your point. Yeah.
Sleeping in the dirt was good enough for you.
Sure.
The fighting men and women in the world.
Right.
Good enough for you. It's good enough for a criminal.
Absolutely. So, absolutely. I believe in humane treatment. You know, we're tasked with their care, but that is, he was, and it was upheld in the courts. For basically that reason. So
there's quite a bit of there's this terrible. I don't know. You guys probably have a name for it in the law enforcement industry, in that people weren't raised right. Mm-hmm. People didn't get taught right from wrong. The daddy didn't teach them right from wrong. And so now they come up against this. The first time they're coming up, a man telling them right from wrong, it's a guy in a uniform saying, "Hey, bro, you can't do that." And for some of these people, it's a damn surprise.
Right.
They don't know. And it's, ignorance is a shame, but it's quite prevalent. And so the first time they come up against a person who is trying to show them you can't live this way, a lot of times it's law enforcement. And the point of law enforcement, and I think you want to help. Mm-hmm. You want to help. The idea of taking a person who has committed a minor crime or even a pretty bad crime, but they're not human garbage. They're savable. By putting that person into a situation where they now have to learn to do different, and not just by locking them up and throwing away the key, putting somebody in a tent, making them pick up trash, make them clear land. Make them do hard work and make them think about it. You really have the chance of taking a person who is way off the road to a good life for themselves. You may actually bring that person a little closer to a viable path. Call. Absolutely. A viable path for a good life, which I think everybody ultimately wants to have a good life. A lot of them don't know.
Right.
They're very confused. And the system doesn't support a lot of repair. It's not self-repairing. It's actually these days it's implosive. It has a tendency to set up for more failure. There's a lot of systems in place in the United States of America. There's a lot of systems set up in place in major cities throughout the country that have this tendency to not enforce the law. Well, we don't want to enforce the law because we don't want to make trouble for these kids. Hitting somebody in the head with a brick is a crime. And people need to know you can't do that. People need to know that the law is going to come down on you. Because I was raised, if you do wrong, the law is going to come down on you, and you don't want that. My father would tell us, you don't want to get involved with the law, bro. Whatever it is you got going on, you try to deal with it before the police get there. You don't want to be in that life where you're constantly having to be involved with the police. It's not good.
No, and I think, and I view, the world from the biblical perspective as much as the Bible says that ultimately that it's not a war against flesh and blood, but it's powers and principalities. And so and it started before our lifetime, but obviously, we're viewing firsthand what we've witnessed in our, and from our childhood on up. It's just a general degradation of culture. There's no more moral absolutes. There's no more absolute right or wrongs. And, you know, I can remember when I was in school, you know, the teachers had paddles and they weren't afraid to use them.
No.
And, you know, I might have thought that I had ADHD, but I was cured of it. And I eventually learned how to sit down and pay attention. And, you know, fast forward several years later, I was in law enforcement as an adult, and I was actually a school resource officer. And then, well, to back up, you know, and if I got in trouble at school, you know, when I went home, Mom and Dad didn't say, well, what did the teacher do? You know, what, you know, they were on my rear end again. And so you fast forward, and I was up as a school resource officer working in the schools, and sometimes I would be called to the office by the principal to help the principal for a change instead of being on the receiving end of that discipline, just as for security, basically, because the parent is like, you know, why are you harassing my baby? You know, what did y'all do? And it's like, you know, they didn't do anything. It's your child, the one that is misbehaving and did A, B, and C. And so, you know, I just find that it's just been a paradigm shift from, you know, the child is, you know, instead of the discipline on a child, it's protecting them and defending them. And sometimes our kids don't need defending. Sometimes we need to be the first one as a parent on them. And
for sure.
So, you know, it's our job. And I have two boys, they're 30 and 27 now. And, you know, it's and so I've lived it, so I could say it. You know, it's our job to prepare our children to launch. You know, if you wait till they're 15 or 16 to try to start implementing discipline and morals and to be a good citizen, you're way behind the eight ball. You're done. I mean, because their worldview is formed, and nowadays it's formed a lot earlier and a lot more solid just through the social media platforms that they have access to. You know, when we were kids, we didn't have anything.
No.
We had a Rubik's Cube. You know what? And I wasn't good at that. I got a side, and I never could even get two sides on it. But anyway, today they're just inundated with, you know, the world. And so as parents, if we don't, you know, mold our children and protect them, man, the world's going to do it if we don't.
And it ain't going to be good.
It's not going to be good. By design, it's not going to be good.
I've done a fair bit of traveling. I've been to a lot of other places in the world, and I've seen how other places are. And, you know, it's rough. We as Americans, we are living in a little island in the rest of the world. And sadly, most people don't have the opportunity to go and witness the real world in other parts of the world. You know, just because you've gotten on an airplane and gone to a resort, you know, somewhere in the Bahamas doesn't mean you have a
global
real
perspective. Yeah,
you don't have an understanding of what happens in the southern hemisphere of the planet. You've just been to, you know, it's essentially
right.
it's a false sense of knowledge or a false sense of experience.
Sure.
And I did have the opportunity to go to a few places and witness a few things. And you said a breakdown of culture. We certainly don't uphold our family traditions the way we have in the past. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why it is. There's definitely been an erosion of people. There's a breakdown or a lack of respect or some sort of withdrawal from these traditional family experiences where, you know, we do this on this day and we do this at this time.
Sure.
And, you know, a lot of people have not, a lot of people are not raised with much knowledge of the church or the Bible or,
right.
You know, Christian belief systems. And I've witnessed a lot of other cultures that have a lot of other belief systems, and a lot of them come down to very, very similar Christian values. You know, I mean, I've been a lot of places and had religious discussions with people of complete different cultures.
Sure.
And I think depending upon where they are in the world, their religions have a tendency to create a roadmap or a rule book or a guide to survival in that particular part of the world. You know,
Right.
That's what religions do. Faiths do for us as people. They give us some sort of guiding star or something.
It's a moral compass.
It's a compass. It's a way to say this is right and this is wrong, and we've surely gotten away from that in the idea of young people learning about the world through social media, which has, it's a tool, you know, it's a thing now, and it's quite dangerous, and it can be very beautiful. I guess it's like a river.
Well,
you know, it's beautiful to look at, but you get in and it'll kill you.
That's right.
You know, you get ground up
The
in
undercurrent, yeah.
There's an ugliness there that you can't, from a distance, you can't really appreciate. You know, crashing waves look beautiful and majestic from the hilltop, but go get in them and they'll kill you. They will.
Well put.
And you know, and so that sort of danger that lies in that social media world, we'll keep calling it that. As a parent, I see an extraordinary amount of that happening, and I've worked really hard to keep my children living in the world that I've witnessed, and teaching them about how the world is, and teaching them how to have some sort of path for themselves. You know, choose a path.
Sure.
It's not always going to be right, you know, but at least have. You know, the whole stand for something or your fall for anything. Right. I really go back to that one a lot. You got to do something. Like my dad used to always say, do something, even if it's wrong.
That's right. Make a decision. Yes,
that's right.
Absolutely. But I mean, we're as adults, we're just as susceptible to it. You know, I find myself a lot of times. My wife and I go somewhere, and you know, I'll get a text or something while I'm sitting at the dinner table with her in a restaurant. You know, or she will, and you know, one of us will pop out our phone, or we're talking about something. It's like, what was the date of that event again? And it was like, and so next thing we know, we get a text, and it's like the bill's coming, and we haven't even enjoyed our company at dinner. So it's robbed us of time as well. Even as I'm sitting here today talking to you, I purposely left my phone downstairs in your office.
Me too.
My wrist is about to buzz to death, and you know, I should have left my watch too. So you can't escape from it. It's maddening sometimes.
It's a high pace. It's a high pace that we live in now. You know, it used to just be city people that had a high pace lifestyle, and it's because there was a lot going on, and they were close to everything, and there was a lot of accessibility. But I think it's spread to a lot of our culture, and I'm certainly guilty of the same thing. Yeah. You have announced officially you are a candidate for sheriff of Tangipola Parish.
That's correct. Yeah, and so you know, when I retired June of 21 from Mandeville Police Department, I moved back home to Tangipola Parish, and you know, almost immediately, people that know me, family, friends, other professionals, and in the parish and in the different communities around Tangipola, I'd run across them, and it's like, you know, Gerald, you're too young to retire, man. What you gonna do? And you know, you should run for sheriff here. You got so much to offer, and we know how you ran the department, and you know, previously, and I would shut them down. You know, I was like, no, I'm good. Thank you, no, thank you, man. I got I got 3 little grandsons, and I wanted to try to polish up on the golf game, and you know, and just get my feet back under me. And I was 100% sincerely I thought I was done with law enforcement, especially. I mean, there was going to be other opportunities, but you know, I really wasn't law enforcement focused at all. You know, I felt God closing that door at Mandeville, and I didn't know why. Everything was going great. Man had a good runs, making good money. The city was hitting on all cylinders, and but you know, I just felt an emptiness, for lack of better words, and so I just felt God closing that door, and so I retired without a plan B necessarily, but God almost immediately started putting conversations in front of me, and I was like, no, you know, 100 times no. And just because of just the grind of politics, and I said previously I was an appointed chief, not elected, and just the thought of having to, you know, politic and run for office and pound your chest about, I was in the Marines and I did this. I was chief of police and, an FBI Academy graduate and all. That just grinded on me. And then having to, raise money and just all the necessary evils that go along with campaigning. I did not know. It was not anything that I wanted to do any way, shape, or form, but I felt with every conversation, God nudging me, and I was like, come on, God, anything but this,
Mm-hmm.
But he's like, this is what I built you for, and this is what I prepared you for. And so it took, a little over 10 months of just different people that didn't know one another having the same conversation with me, that I didn't start any of them. And because I was wanting to talk about golf and I was wanting to talk about anything but, law enforcement. I loved it, and I missed the clowns, but I didn't miss the circus, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
And, but finally, I'm a little slow at times, but finally I was like, all right, God, this is what you want me to do. I'm going to do it to whatever end it meets. And so, yeah, I moved back home and I see things going on in my home parish. And, I made the observation that, Tangipola is not that different from its neighbor in St. Tammany Parish, where St. Tammany was years ago, and just the influx of, people moving in, the native population growing, and then you got the influx of people from all over. Katrina boosted that a lot, obviously, and with every storm, you see another wave of people moving, and as crimes of violence increase in the bigger cities around us, Baton Rouge, New Orleans, all the big metropolitan areas, you see that constant. It's growing, and so, St. Tammany's full. It's full. It's busting at the seams, and the traffic, the infrastructure is behind, and so we see. The BDCO that I grew up in, man, it was nothing like it is today. From BDCO, from the Parish line at BDCO all the way through Ponchatoula, it's just one.
It's Mandeville West.
It's just one constant string of subdivision, one subdivision after another, and so it's growing. The industry's growing, so the parish is like growing. It's busting at the seams, and there's a void in the law enforcement perspective, that I feel that, I can take that sheriff's office to the next level. I've lived it in St. Tammany. I started with Mandeville 92, before there was a big Lakeview Regional Hospital, or before, the big subdivisions popped up in Mandeville. And so I live and I grew up in a department that grew with its, with that community coming up. And so, I feel like it's almost a deja vu moment right here in Tangipola, and they're well on their way to explode. Man, the industry over there around the airport, the industrial park, you have Medline, and name one, but there's tons of worldwide companies, industries that are either have hubs in Tangipola or that are headquartered in Tangipola Parish. And of course, you have the agricultural aspect. My grandfather, which I never knew, he passed away when my dad was 2, unexpectedly. He was a strawberry farmer, and between BDCO and Ponchatoula. My family goes back a long way. My mom's from actually Covington. My dad's from Ponchatoula. Probably the 1700s was the earliest I've tracked my lineage on my dad's side back. There's actually a grave marker in Madisonville Cemetery from the War of 1812. There's a Lawrence sticker buried there. And so, my roots run deep right at the parish line. And, St. Tammany and Tangi are very interconnected. And so, I'm glad to be back home. I love, my community. I love Tangipola Parish. But, for the last 30 years, God has called me away and prepared me for this next opportunity. And I had no idea at the time. I was just having fun being a cop. And not to brag, but I was a good one. I enjoyed it.
A lot of my family still lives in Tangipola. And I am certain that when I reach retirement age, I'm going to end up hopefully if I live long enough, I'll end up retiring
Right.
in that part of our area. And what happens to the future of Tangipola Parish is very important to me.
Absolutely.
My family's farmland is there, and that's something that we all hold on to is very important to us. And I know I've witnessed the growth that's happening now in Tangipola Parish. Around Hammond, it's going crazy, and between Hammond and Laranger, there is extraordinary amounts of development, residential development. That all has to be policed, protected. That's all sheriff's department.
Absolutely.
And that's a lot of land. That's a lot of responsibility. And it's going to take some real strategic policing to get that done. Not politicians.
No.
Not somebody who is the classic Louisiana politician stuff. That's not going to work. It's not going to work. And I think one of the upsides of our one of the good takeaways from our modern social media society is if you mess up, everybody knows about it. Instantly.
Yep.
And sadly, there's a lot of people that mess up and they still don't get found out as quick as they should. But in due time, everything does come to light. The truth always does has an interesting way of bubbling to the top. Even if people don't want to admit it, it does.
Sure.
I think that it is key. It is absolutely key. Law enforcement is going to determine the future of Tangipola Parish because of how much space there is there. And you can't have people running amok like you do. I don't want to name names. I don't want to name areas. But there's certain areas that don't get a lot of attention, and bad stuff starts going down. Because they know nobody's looking. They know nobody's looking.
Right. Yeah, there's no repercussions.
No, you do what you want. They're not going to catch you. Or you get away with it for a long time, and then maybe you can move on.
Right.
So the sensation that I'm never going to get caught exists. It's a very strong impulse in people who want to be involved in legal activity. Right. And I'm not just talking about people speeding.
No.
I'm not talking about, people just breaking the law. This is criminals. Bad people doing bad things.
No, I've had, since the past 5 months since I've been actively out talking to people and introducing myself to people and reintroducing myself to other people, the stories I hear just about, the drug houses in their communities. I've got, videos that people have sent me of, individuals that were just strung out on drugs in their front yard, and it's just horrible, and just the lack of response they've gotten from the existing powers that be, if you will, and they're done, they're ready for change, and I tell people, well, the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior, and look at my record. Look at how I ran Mandeville Police Department. It's one of the best, in my opinion, one of the premier agencies, law enforcement agencies on the North Shore. Probably I'd put them up against anybody in the state, as far as training, education, and equipment, and just the way that, because we run it like a business. We police our community. And community police is not just a tag phrase, right? And it's something that we do, and it's all relationship-based. That's why my business card had my cell phone number on it. Any one of my citizens could call me. And if I didn't answer the phone, I would call them back. And I may not be able to help them, but at least I told them that I can't help you with that. And so, and I'll be able to hit the ground running in Tangipola. I have existing relationships with all the local chiefs. I was a member of the Louisiana Chiefs of Police Association, so I know every one of those police chiefs. The one or two that I didn't know before that are fairly new, I've since went and introduced myself to, and I've talked to them, and so I have a working relationship with those chiefs, because whoever is in the community of Wilmer, stealing things is also in Tickfaw, and they're in, the criminal knows no jurisdictional boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as law enforcement locally, we need to all be working together. And because if it affects one of our communities, it affects the other one, and it ultimately affects the whole parish. I also have, solid working relationship with the state police and our federal agencies, and that's what it's going to take. Look, those, as I said very early on in this conversation, a lot of those federal agents, they live on the North Shore. They're begging for a reason to stay over here and go to work, And I'm fully prepared to put them to work to augment, the existing deputies that I have on the job or will have when I take over the sheriff's office. Is they're going to be coming to help us, and they're going to be dealing with the drug issues, the gang issues, the crimes of violence issues, all the community-sensitive issues that any community is dealing with, and it's prevalent in Tangipola, and it's a war, and we're behind the 8 ball already, and so we need to get out and we need to get to work on it because it is not going to get better by itself. The community's growing, the population's growing, and law enforcement better be able to keep up with it.
Something I've noticed, criminals like to go where the action is.
Absolutely. They follow the money.
They follow the money. And, New Orleans has got a lot of action. Baton Rouge has a lot of trouble these days. I didn't hear this on the news. I hear this from people who live in Baton Rouge. Mm-hmm. I hear this from people who are getting their vehicles broken into, who are people who are being, physically assaulted, robbed,
Sure.
Having their homes invaded, regular day in, day out crime problems.
Right.
I hear this from people who have moved. And, Mandeville is full of people from New Orleans, but guess what? There's a lot of people from Baton Rouge here, too.
Absolutely.
And they're coming here because, they can't make it anymore in what the old environment provided. So we've got a really nice thing going here in Tangipola Parish and in St. Tammany. We've got a really good sized region of extraordinary potential. There's still room. I mean,
Sure.
There's not a lot of room left in Mandeville, but look, there's room up on 1088. Mm-hmm. There's room on 190 between here and Robert. There's room. There's room for people. There's room to build great things.
Right.
And I love progress. I mean, I don't want to bulldoze all the trees and
Absolutely
concrete
not.
the place over, but I love progress.
It needs to be responsible growth.
I love it. And I firmly, genuinely believe that without proper law enforcement, it won't happen.
No. And there again, education, law enforcement, that's why people live in communities. That they can raise their kids, get a good education, so they'll eventually launch and be productive members of society, and they want to be safe while they're doing it. They want to be able to go out and walk their streets at night or, go shopping and not have to look over their shoulder when they're pumping gas. And so that's it. And it's very simply stated, but it's a very difficult and complex nut to crack, if you will.
When you first told me that you were thinking about going for sheriff, I said, hell yeah. I remember the first thought, I was like, well if not you, who?
Mm-hmm.
If you could campaign solely, I think I'll tell you this, you could campaign solely based on your Marine Corps experience, and I'd vote for you.
Right.
Aside from everything that you've done after that, and I want to encourage people. I have a lot of friends and family, like I said, in Tangipola Parish. I want to encourage anyone who's thinking about what they're going to do. Think about this man. Think about his service to this country, and then compare that to whoever else is going to be running for sheriff.
Sure.
Just compare it honestly. I don't know the other people. I don't know how many other people there are. I don't know them, but I know you. And if I got to bet on somebody, I'm betting on you.
Well, I appreciate that.
I think you can do it. I want to give you my absolute
Right.
best vote of confidence.
And so I've never ran for any elected office, but I'm a public servant, and so but I'll there again I'll stack my my resume up. I have a strong enough resume that I can tell people why I should be sheriff and not why somebody else shouldn't.
That's right.
And so, that maybe that's pie in the sky when I know just enough about Louisiana politics to know it's probably going to be mutual destruction of all involved parties. But, I have every intention of, running my race and telling people why Gerald Sticker should be the next sheriff of Tangipola Parish.
I really like people who have been places and gone and done things. And I certainly count you in that group. So I just wanted to say thank you.
I appreciate you
coming today.
Thank you for the opportunity, and as always, appreciate your friendship.
Nothing to it, man. Thanks. Cheers.
Cheers.
The Diamond King. It's the Diamond King podcast. It's the Diamond